Have you ever wondered how much of your thinking is really yours? Every day, we make decisions, form opinions, and draw conclusions, believing them to be independent and rational. But what if many of these thoughts are being quietly shaped by invisible forces? Today, we'll explore the unseen psychological, social, and environmental influences that guide our thoughts, often without us even realizing. These forces are subtle. They rarely announce themselves. Yet they shape our beliefs, our choices, and even our identity. In this video, we'll unpack the most powerful invisible forces that guide human thought. From cognitive biases to cultural norms, from language to brain chemistry, this is an exploration of how little we control and how much we're influenced. Our brains are incredible, but they aren't perfect. To manage the overwhelming amount of information we process daily, the brain relies on shortcuts, also known as cognitive biases. Cognitive biases are mental tendencies that affect our judgments and decisions. They are not inherently bad. In fact, they evolved to help us make fast decisions in complex situations. But they can distort our thinking in predictable ways. One of the most common is the confirmation bias, the tendency to seek, interpret, and remember information that confirms our pre-existing beliefs. We're more likely to believe something if it fits with what we already think. Then there's the availability heuristic, judging something based on how easily examples come to mind. If you've recently heard about a plane crash, you might overestimate how dangerous flying is, even though statistically, it's safer than driving. Another major bias is the anchoring effect. When making decisions, we often rely too heavily on the first piece of information we receive. That first number or idea, whether accurate or not, sets a psychological anchor. These biases operate beneath our awareness. They feel like rational thought, but they quietly bend the path of our thinking. Humans are social creatures. Our brains are wired for connection. As a result, we are deeply influenced by social norms, the unwritten rules that govern behavior within a group. We often adjust our thoughts and actions to align with what others are doing, even when we're unaware of it. This is known as conformity. Some experiments show that people would intentionally give the wrong answer to a simple question, just because others in the group did. Why? The desire to fit in can override our own judgment. The influence of social norms doesn't just apply to actions. It also shapes what we think is true, acceptable, or valuable. Over time, we adopt the norms of the cultures we live in, absorbing their assumptions and worldviews. This means our thoughts are often molded not by reason, but by the expectations of the people around us. We may think we're thinking for ourselves, but we're often thinking for the tribe. Language doesn't just help us communicate, it shapes the very way we think. Different languages carve the world up in different ways. For instance, some languages have multiple words for what English speakers would call blue. Speakers of those languages can actually perceive and distinguish colors differently. This idea, known as linguistic relativity, suggests that the structure of a language affects its speaker's cognition and worldview. Even grammar matters. In some languages, verbs require speakers to specify how they know something, whether they saw it, heard it, or inferred it. This can affect how much attention they pay to sources of information. Language also guides attention. When we describe people or events, the words we choose emphasize certain aspects and minimize others. Over time, these patterns of emphasis create habitual ways of thinking. So when we ask, what influences our thoughts, we have to look at the language we use to think with. How information is presented, its framing, can drastically change how we think about it. Consider two statements. This treatment has a 90% success rate versus this treatment has a 10% failure rate. They describe the same reality, but people tend to perceive the first one more positively. Framing effects tap into our emotions and shape our interpretation of facts. Politicians, marketers, and media outlets understand this deeply. By adjusting the frame, they can nudge our thinking in subtle ways. Even the way questions are phrased can influence responses. In surveys, asking "How much do you agree with this?" can yield different answers than "Do you support or oppose this?" The content might be the same, but the frame changes how we mentally process it. This invisible force operates constantly, in advertising, news, and conversations. Recognizing it is the first step in regaining control of how we think. We like to imagine ourselves as logical beings, but our thoughts are rarely untouched by emotion. Emotions act like colored lenses. When we're angry, we interpret events differently than when we're calm. When we're afraid, we overestimate risks. When we're in love, we see only the good. These emotional states aren't just responses to our thoughts, they shape the thoughts themselves. Fear narrows our focus. Joy broadens it. Sadness deepens reflection. Excitement sparks creativity. Each emotion brings a different style of cognition. What's more, emotions from one area of life can spill over into another, something psychologists call emotional contagion. A bad morning commute might make you more pessimistic about a work project. You think you're being rational, but you're really just moody. Understanding how emotions guide thought helps us separate real analysis from emotional reaction. Much of our thought is not conscious. In fact, neuroscientists estimate that the vast majority of brain activity happens outside our awareness. Our subconscious mind is constantly processing, evaluating, and filtering information. It forms associations, stores memories, and influences decisions, often without ever surfacing in our awareness. This is why intuition can feel so powerful. It's the product of subconscious pattern recognition. When you just know something, it's often your subconscious doing the work. However, the subconscious can also carry out outdated assumptions, learned fears, and hidden biases. Because we're unaware of them, they can subtly shape how we interpret new information. Meditation, journaling, and therapy are tools that help bring the subconscious into awareness, allowing us to work with it instead of being unknowingly guided by it. Culture is the water we swim in. It defines what we consider normal, valuable, or true. From early childhood, we absorb cultural narratives. Ideas about success, gender roles, morality, and identity are passed down not just through formal education, but through media, rituals, and social interactions. We don't just live in a culture. It lives in us. We internalize its stories, ideals, and definitions. What we see as common sense is often just cultural programming. For example, individualistic cultures prioritize independence and personal achievement. Collectivist cultures emphasize community and harmony. These values shape the way people think about relationships, goals, and even the self. Becoming aware of cultural conditioning allows us to question inherited ideas and think more critically. Today, one of the most powerful invisible forces shaping our thoughts is technology, especially social media. Algorithms are designed to capture and hold our attention. They feed us content based on what we've already engaged with, creating echo chambers that reinforce existing beliefs. Over time, our information diet becomes narrow and emotionally charged. We see more of what we agree with, and less of what challenges us. This distorts our sense of reality and polarizes thinking. Notifications, infinite scroll, and content filters are not neutral features, they're behavioral nudges. They steer our attention, and by doing so, they guide our thought patterns. If we don't take control of how we interact with technology, it will take control of how we think. We tend to think of memory as a recording. But memory is not a playback, it's a reconstruction. Thanks for watching. If you want to watch more this kind of video, then do not forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon.